Hello and welcome to the next study in the book of Galatians, and we're going to look this study at chapter 3, verses 15 to 29. Now, having explained why faith superseded the law, Paul then explains what the purpose of the law was in the first place. If the law is no longer applicable, the question that will be in many people's minds is, well, what was the purpose of the law in the first place? And it's even been suggested that the law might be something evil and undesirable. But recent research into Jewish thought at the Second Temple period shows that Jews had a very high regard for the law. So what place does it have in New Testament thought? And can I just say right from the start that nowhere does Paul say that the law is bad or the law was a bad thing, because the law was given by God. The point Paul makes all the way through is the law was given by God as a temporary thing, and this is what we now explain. In verse 15, Paul starts by using the illustration of a human covenant, which once made cannot be broken, and the covenant was the promise. He says the covenant that God made with Abraham was not to his seeds, plural, but to one seed in particular. In other words, the covenant was made with the Messiah in mind, who was to come and was to fulfill the promise by blessing the nations by bringing them into the covenant. In other words, the law was not a permanent fixture, but a temporary one made to Israel as a nation 430 years after Abraham, and not to the world. Verse 17. It didn't cancel the promise God gave originally to Abraham. Paul reaffirms the fact, verse 18, that if the inheritance came through the law, through the Torah, it would not be a promise. But actually, God gave it originally to Abraham by a promise. So now Paul explains the purpose of the law. If you look at the first part of verse 19, he says it was added because of transgressions. Greek is parabasis, i.e. the breaking of a law. It was added because of man's inclination to break the law, to transgress. So first of all, it was added to show sin up for what it was. Romans 5:20, so that sin might be shown as sin. Secondly, it was added like a break, to stop sin getting worse. Law might not stop sin, but it will stop sin getting worse. And thirdly, it was to give Israel an identity and a temporary way to God through sacrifice, that God might dwell among them. And the next part of verse 19, it was only until the family should come to whom it had been promised. That family is the Messiah family, the church. And the implication is now that the job of the law is done. And if you look at the last part of verse 19 and verse 20, it says the law was laid down by angels as a temporary measure through the hands of a mediator, and that man was Moses. But Moses was not the mediator designed to give the one family that God ultimately intended of both Jews and Gentiles. In fact, the law, in the purposes of God, kept Jews and Gentiles separate until the Messiah came and brought the oneness God ultimately intended, as we shall see. Now, Paul packs this meaning into this very short and cryptic passage. And verse 21, this then generates a second order question. Is the law then against God's promises? And Paul points out that the problem lies not with the law, with the Torah, but with the material it is working with. You see, the law cannot give life because those whom it is working with cannot keep it. Those of Abraham's family who are chosen to be the light of the world and given the law are infected with the same disease of sin as the rest of the world. And therefore comes the need of the crucified Messiah, because covenant membership can, or if you like, righteousness, cannot be by the law. So verse 22, what does the law do? What the law does is to shut everything up in the present house of sin. The word is hamartia, so that the promise given to Abraham, which comes through the faithfulness of the Messiah and is received by corresponding faith and trust in the heart of the believer, is then given as a grace gift to those who believe. In other words, it's through the faithfulness of the Messiah we are released through faith from the prison house of sin and become people of the covenant. Romans 8:1, there is no condemnation for them who are in Christ. And to get the point home in verses 23 to 24, Paul now describes the condition before and after faith came. In other words, before the gospel and after the gospel. Before the gospel, he says, we were kept under guard, in close confinement by the Torah. The Jews were kept under guard. Paul is talking from personal experience. But that was until faith or faithfulness was to be revealed. And what illustration does Paul use? Rather an amusing illustration. He uses the illustration of, the word is pedagogue. And the various translations of that, the King James Version uses the translation of schoolmaster. But the actual word is pedagogue, and the Greek word pedagogos, it represented the slave in a Roman household whose job it was to get the children to and from school and make sure they didn't get up to mischief on the way. We might say a childminder. And the Torah was like that. He was this slave was like a very strict childminder. I believe in certain cases he was given a cane, and he could actually cane the children if they misbehaved. The Roman way of bringing up children. But the Torah was like that until the coming of the Messiah. So that when we grow up into covenant membership or righteousness on the basis of faith, well, thank God we outgrow the need of the childminder. That's verse 25. Oh, thank God we've no need of a childminder any longer. We are grown up into faith in the Messiah. So the astounding statement in verse 26, the fact is that all of us, Jews and Gentiles, are all children. The Greek word is sons, because of course the son in Paul's day was the one who received the inheritance. We are all sons of God through faith in the Messiah Jesus. And of course, son includes men and women. So in the Messiah Jesus, Paul says, verse 26 to 29, Paul says we are all sons of God in Messiah Jesus. We are baptized into the Messiah. We are clothed in the Messiah. We are all one in Messiah Jesus. We are belonging to the Messiah. Therefore, we are all Abraham's seed and promised heirs. Verse 26, it says, our sonship has made us the true heirs of Abraham. Verse 27, in our baptism we put on, we clothed ourselves with the Messiah. We gained a new Messianic identity, just as we may have worn a baptismal garment when we were baptized, so Christ has given us a new garment of covenant membership or righteousness. We are put on the righteousness of Christ. Therefore, the astounding and revolutionary statement in verse 28, which has perhaps been hijacked by the world but is the basis of all human rights. In the Messiah family, there is no distinction between Jew or Gentile, male or female, slave or free. Everyone is on the same level in Messiah Jesus. We are all the sons of God. You see, in the Messiah, the meanest slave is just as much a son of God as the greatest senator, the greatest politician, the king, whatever. We are all the sons of God in the Messiah. All the old class distinctions are passed away. All the race distinctions are passed away, and if they are not, there is something wrong with us. We are all one in Messiah Jesus. And in verse 29, then, Paul logically concludes that therefore they, the uncircumcised Gentiles, because the Galatians, because they belong to the Messiah, are Abraham's seed. They are the ones who stand to inherit the promise given to Abraham through faith. And this is the end of his logic, which he has now worked out through the law. And as I said at the beginning, it is not that Paul considers that the law was bad. No, the law was given by God and the law was good. But the law was a temporary necessity until the Messiah came, so that covenant membership could now come by faith in the Messiah and his faithfulness. We are all sons of God through the Messiah Jesus.